I couldn't do this work without all these people. So, and all these different teams. And because this is really a thought piece, everybody that I've ever worked with kind of has contributed to it. So, the Internet of Things. I don't have to tell anybody what that is, right? Does everybody know what that is? IoT? You don't know what it is? Okay, great. Internet of Things. We all know what that is. It allows us to do what I like to call mHealth to the fourth power, because we get to monitor, we get to model, we get to try and modify, and the hardest part is trying to maintain health-related behaviors in real time and in context, because context is king. My behavior is entirely different here, for instance, in front of y'all, than in my hotel room. Thank God, right? But my eating behavior is also going to be very different at a fancy dinner like last night, or at home, where I might carry my plate from room to room, or grab things out of the refrigerator. The fancy restaurant that we were in last night would be offended should I do that. So our behaviors are very, very different depending on context. So, and the Internet of Things, just to remind you, it offers us all these different tied together sensing modalities on body, chemical, and implantable, deployable. Have you guys seen this thing? This refrigerator that can order food for you? It's kind of scary. Yes, it knows what's in there, and it then it's Samsung, and then it contacts Google, I think, and it orders things for you. All of your digital exhaust, your digital breadcrumbs, how you use the internet, and it's all wrapped into this persistent user's interface that allows us to do this mobile health to the fourth power in real time and in context. Because context in the 21st century is going to allow us to go from point of care to point of need. Okay, that's my introduction. Any questions? Moving forward. Please do this first whenever you are developing something for mobile health. And I need to credit Petja Klajna and Eric Heckler for these points, and the good points are theirs and the ones that I messed with are mine. But you've got to define the problem before you leave the starting block. So what problem are you targeting, really? Right? So obesity is a big problem, but that's not the problem you're going to target. That's too big. We'll talk about it in a moment. What are the influences and who's the target group? That's going to determine everything you make and everything you do. And then only after you do this with a skeleton team, with the people that you want to work with. But only after you sort of decide what it is that we're going to try and do you develop the team. But that's kind of iterative. Who's going to be at your table? And then that first blush intervention design, you have to think, how can we help tackle the problem? And how can technology support? I cannot say this enough times. Mobile health, new technologies are widgets. They don't do anything by themselves. If they did, I would be out of a job, because if everybody listened to their Fitbit, I wouldn't need to promote physical activity ever again, but peeps don't. So mobile health has to be embedded in an intelligent intervention. Otherwise, it's just a widget, fun or not. So how can technology support? Then you choose technologies. Hey, I can't see my fifth point, which means we're going to have trouble altogether. What is my fifth point? Oh, well, it'll come up again. And how should individual features work? Yeah, is that fixable? Because I can't see it here either.
Yeah, it's the bottom piece interfering.
And how will the intervention be used and experienced?
Yeah. If I knew how.
Something else you'll hear me say over and over again, in anything that involves technology, whether it's a product. What's that thing right there? It's never going to go as expected.
No.
Okay, you know what? We'll roll with it. This is why I never do live demos, ever. Okay, it's just, we'll roll with it. So for today's talk, my problem is going to be childhood obesity. And here are the horrible statistics and childhood obesity and adult obesity here. And then just so that you know, childhood obesity and adult obesity is not an equal opportunity employer. So our minority populations are much more strongly affected. What's not up on this slide is the American Indian or our native populations, where 75% of the kids are overweight or obese, 75. And that's from a couple of years ago. So what influences the problem? So I'm just gonna go through my own checklist. That's what I'm doing, right? The checklist that didn't quite show, we're going through that. What influences the problem? Well, stress, sleep, exercise, and diet. These are like the 4 things on the chair. And then, of course, socioeconomic status and discrimination and inequity, which you can't see because, but there they are, influence everything. And all of that in context. So I don't have to remind you that our disadvantaged kids often live in what we call food swamps, where there's only fast food, or food deserts where there's nothing. So the next thing, so we've defined the problem, and we've defined a behavior, let's say diet and physical activity. Who is at your table? Who do you choose? And I'm gonna give you 2 examples. So now we're going to go into the fun part. Any questions? No, that was all pretty simple, okay. Virtual Sprouts was a virtual gardening game, and what could go wrong did go wrong in this project. It was hilarious. The idea was, so we got together, fighting childhood obesity, we wanted to do something in the schools, we talked to teachers, we had an educator on our team, and we came up with the idea, and this was quite a while ago, of making it a game that kids could use in school. So one of the great ideas of a game that kids can use in schools, and really I think in the future of education, if we're smart, will be no more tests. Because you can see how a kid is doing in the back end. If you use your data properly, you can see where things go wrong, you can see how well they're doing, you can embed tests into a game. So that was the idea, is we're going to teach them to garden and to grow their own food using a game. And this idea came from LA Sprouts, which was a gardening intervention in schools, where we actually put gardens in schools. That was fun and actually quite successful, but not at all sustainable and super expensive. So we thought maybe it's portable, or maybe we can do this together. So that was the idea. So who was at our table for this? This was like the mushrooming team, the unaffordable team. So we had a human-computer interactions to design it. We had engineers and computer scientists. We had educators. We had methodologists. Because what are you going to do with this data? How are you going to design your intervention? And what are you going to do with the data? Because bringing a game into a school and then having a control group, let's talk about that. Data scientists, what are you going to do with this data? How are you going to deal with the back end? Creatives, let me just build that out. This was a game. I'd like you all to know that this is my 2nd career, and my 1st career was as a professional flutist. I was a classically trained flutist in the Netherlands, where I lived for 22 years. So the reason I'm telling you this is because we had creatives. We knew that we needed script writers because I live in Hollywood. Artists to make the game beautiful. Technology artists who have to port the drawings, who have to make it into something tech. Graphic designers, filmmakers, game developers, a producer, glue person. Okay, so here's where I made my mistake. We forgot to hire anyone to make the music. This was a game. Yes, I'm a musician and I forgot that. So that's how hard it is to know what you need, right? However, then we built ourselves into donuts to get musicians. Somebody made this beautiful music for us. And then we went into the classroom and realized everybody's playing at the same time. You can't have the music turned on. Yes, so the things that one has to think about. The other thing that went wrong in this particular intervention development was the producer or glue person. I was the glue person. I am a psychologist, and I was the PI. I should have knighted one of the tech people as the glue person. I should have had a co-therapist. Anyway, lessons learned. And then we needed nutritionists and behaviorists and stakeholders, the target group. Very important. So then I'm going to run through these, right? We saw these before. First blush design. I can't say this often enough, and I hope I'm not stepping on your toes for later, but waterfall design is what people usually do. And waterfall design, you want to explain it?
Well, I can do it in one sentence.
That's what I want.
It's pretty monolithic.
Okay. Waterfall design is you decide what you're going to do, you design it, you develop it, and you deploy it. That is often how things work. That is often how things work in tech companies. Okay. An agile design is when you just analyze the problem, design, develop, test. Analyze with stakeholders, with teachers, with students. Analyze all the things that went wrong, design, develop, test. With stakeholders, with students. Analyze, develop. This is like a pig with an endless corkscrew tail. And one of the hardest things about agile design is to decide when to stop. We're going to stop now, right? Okay, so we did the agile design, game design phase 1. I'm not going to walk you through all of this, but since we were developing a game, you need a story. It has to have some kind of story in your game, right? What's it going to be about? You have to develop a narrative, game mechanics. You have to choose platforms. We had a lot of misunderstandings here with the Caucasian game developer and the Hispanic kids who were going to play, and the inappropriate tokens, and there was a lot of stuff that just wasn't appropriate. For also a Caucasian kid at USC, which probably means fairly privileged, really good at his work, really, top of his class. These are kids, so a lot of it was just too hard for them, right? So that going back and touching base with your stakeholders, and then going back to the teachers and them saying, but this has to rhyme with the, if we're going to use classroom time, then you have to match it up to the teaching standards. So then game design phase 2, we make things, we play with them. These slides will be available. These are some of our ideas. This is us trying to decide if this is going to work, which it didn't. And then we get to play test more and more wireframes, more and more drawings. Nothing is programmed yet. And then you can also program, if you're quick at programming, that's great. But when you're developing a game for kids, or actually, I'm going to argue most mobile health, people who say, no, we can just program something quick and dirty. It doesn't work, because then you're looking at a mechanic that doesn't work. So often if you're doing wireframes, drawings, stuff that people can play with themselves, no, I would like this widget this way, I find that a better way to test. Okay, you need to choose an approach to behavior change. How many times do we have to learn that theory-based approaches are the best? They work the best. A theory-based approach does not mean theory-inspired. It means you choose a theory, so let's say self-determination theory, and let's say motivation is a key thing, right? You have to measure it before, during, and after to see if you moved that dime, right? You really have to build it in. Okay, and for this one of the main things was impulse control, which is really hard for kids. These slides will all be available. Okay, and then we had a pedagogical agent. And this slide, I shouldn't really be taking this much time in this talk, but it was so much fun. We decided on the pedagogical agent because that's what kids wanted. They wanted somebody in the game to talk to them. So this is not our agent. He's sad because he lost out in the contest. But what does a pedagogical agent do? It can inhabit space with the learner, comes alongside, provides navigational support, kind of like the Mario Brothers, directs attention and demonstrates task, is part of the story. It can emote and send social signals, build rapport, establish a sense of presence, promote learning, and give feedback and guidance about gardening. So in the end, we came up with this really great story about Dottie, and she guides you through the kitchen and she helps you garden, and it's all quite lovely. And I'm not going to show you results because that's not what I'm here for today, but if you want to see the results, I'm happy to show them. But I wanted to take the time to talk about what I was asked to do, which is tell you sad stories about developing technology. So here's my second one. So we went into the classroom with 80 iPads. Every time we changed the game, every time we redesigned, all 80 iPads had to be refreshed. Yeah, we didn't have the thing where you can push that out yet.
I was going to say, you would push.
It wasn't there yet. It was not, you know, and we made this on Unity, and Unity at that time didn't allow you to push. You had to pull. Yeah. So choosing the platform that you make something on, my first ever mobile health was in Python. Shoot, you know. Anyway, choosing the platform that you make something on is also super, super important. Do that together with the people that you're working with. And I'll tell you why in a moment. So anyway, this is a project that we're currently doing, so from old to new, called M2Fed, Monitoring and Modeling Family Eating Dynamics. Now you've seen my M to the 4th power. That's how the grant went into NSF the first time. And we got it back from the reviewers saying too many M's for 4 years. Choose 2. So, and they were so right. All right, this is my team. They're awesome. The basic premise of monitoring and modeling family eating dynamics, which is what M2Fed means, is that we don't know exactly what people eat because we can't measure it. Anybody want to disagree with that? No. So here's my rabbit hole. It's a rabbit hole trying to understand. You could just go down it forever. You can ask people, you know, these are these horrible interfaces with ta-da where you have to take a picture before and after you eat. Seriously, I've seen kids standing up on their chairs because they can't get far enough. I've seen kids falling off their chairs. You need a fiduciary card to make sure that you know how big the plate is. It's a disaster. You can observe people. You know, those forward-facing cameras like the E button, which is great, but the collateral damage of all the people that are not really in the research. So, and also these tapes are, so then you have hours and hours of videos, and it takes a nutritionist about 9 hours to code one day. Or you can crowdsource it, which turns out to be just as good. Really kind of frightening. Okay, so we don't know what people eat. You can sense people. We're doing that now, wearables, deployables, but that may or may not tell you exactly what they're eating. You can use biological measures. It'll, you know, you can, so for instance, we're working on a project now using a continuous glucose monitor. And we thought, oh, well, I didn't think that, but people who, I'm not PI, thought, oh, we'll know when they eat because glucose. But when you exercise, glucose. When you have stress, glucose. So, yeah. And then you can grab small data, which is very cool, and people are trying to do that. Like they're saying that they can use, actually Melanie Hingle did a very nice job looking at, trying to understand what people are eating through Twitter, which is kind of fun. And it's about as good as anything else. Bree Turner-McIvory, she also did this great thing where she's the one who, she's a nutritionist. So she wanted to show that nutritionists were necessary, and so she did some research looking at these pictures of food with herself and with nutritionists and crowdsourcing, and they were fairly similar. We don't know what people eat, but we do know what people do when they eat. We can know this now. We can know it in real time and in context. And we do know through Leslie Lytle's work and other people's work that we can influence family eating dynamics. So we can change the way people parent around food. We can change the speed of eating. We can change a lot of things if only we knew how. So interventions that work on that have been more successful than interventions that say, don't eat that sugar, because I don't like to be told what to eat. Besides, I don't know what I eat. Okay, so what we wanted to know about eating is all these things. Where, when, with whom, the length of an eating event, your mood, your hunger level when you're eating, your hunger level, are you eating in the absence of hunger? Are you stressed? What did you do right before and after? Who's opening the kitchen cabinets? And what are you doing while you're eating? We wanted to know all these things. So we built, oh wait, so okay, we knew that we wanted this. So then we decided who has to be on the team. So HCI people, again and again and again. This team is, has a lot of engineers on it, and they didn't think we needed HCI. So we had developed a system that we couldn't get out in the field the first time around because people were just like, no. I argued, you know, even if you're PI, you don't always win. You're working on a team. So you need really, you know, this will never happen to this group again because we had to go back. It ate about 6 months up and quite a bit of money to go back and redesign. Yeah. So he's going to give a whole talk on it, but I certainly can. It's when you, the idea of this agile design, and my word for design right there, although it means other things in other moments, is that you look at how people work. So how people work with the stuff that you want to use, what they do with it. So you don't ask them what they want. You don't do a focus group. You do a lot of things that I'm not trained to do, but you're going to talk about, to help understand how a design would work and how people would use it. Henry Ford famously didn't say, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, right? I don't know who said it, but it's always misattributed to him. So it's working around trying to figure out what people would use. So I'll show you our system in a minute, and I'll show you where that went wrong. Ha. We had engineers, computer scientists, these are different animals, methodologists, data scientists, because you'll see what kind of data we're getting out of this. Data safety and security, super important. We had to bring somebody in for that because we were actually doing some sound in the homes. So, sensitive data. Creatives, nutritionists, behaviors, social science, and stakeholders, the people who are actually going to be using the stuff. So, you might need a village for a project like this. This is a very complex project with a lot of sensing. And understanding your needs might not even be in your job description. So when I went to my co-PI, Jack Stankovic at University of Virginia, who's a cyber physical systems guy, he said, oh, we need somebody from a department in engineering I'd never even heard of for X. You know, so don't ever think that you know other people's. The thing about transdisciplinary research is that it's across disciplines. I will never be a computer scientist. I will never be an HCI person. I just don't have that training, and life's too short. I'm barely a behaviorist. I can hardly keep up with the literature, right? So choose the one thing that you're good at, and then you have to take the Rocky the Flying Squirrel approach, which means you leap into the arms of your colleagues and trust them to do their work. Keep talking though, we'll talk about that. All right, so this is what we made. This is the obvious engineering picture, right? You have to have one of these, otherwise you don't count in the world of engineering. It's a cyber physical system, which is like an Internet of Things that's closed unto itself in a way, although not really. And we fitted people got smartphones. We ended up using our own study phones because we developed for Android, which was a choice at the time because Android didn't have System 7 yet, and it let you scrape how people were using their phones, which you can't do anymore. So systems change really quickly. Android is a very unstable experience. We should have programmed for Apple, but we didn't. So in the end, because every time Android changes something, everything blows up. So we ended up using study phones, which is not perfect. Next time around, we're going to develop for Apple. And it turns out in Hollywood, at any rate, everybody's got an Apple anyway. We had these, and here's where study design went wrong. So we are using voice traces to understand mood, not your words. And the engineers had these big microphones, and people just didn't want them in their house. I wouldn't. When I tested the system, I said, I'll test everything but the microphones. I'm the PI. So we needed small dot microphones. And also, what do you see here? What's missing in this lineup? We didn't have any sound tech guys. And if you're going to be working that intimately with sound, you need somebody who understands what technology you should be using. So we had beacons, which are really kind of lovely. Does people know what these beacons are? You know, they're really pretty. They're called, what's it called? Huh? No. There's a company that we use. They're very pretty. They look like little puzzle pieces, a little green, and they're different colors, and you stick them on places. And what they do is they can either sync up to your watch or to your phone. So we knew who's in the room, and we also know who's opening the cabinets. Now, these beacons are hard to program. We needed a whole different engineer for that because they are, they're not perfect in their range. So if we want to know who's in the room, we have to know that in the next room in these paper-thin walls, that's the next room. So very, very interesting. We used ecological momentary assessment that was triggered by either eating. So eating, we're detecting with the wrist, and sound traces for stress and other things that isn't going very well yet. And location, there were a bunch of ways to trigger the EMA. I have a slide on it. Because we wanted to know if you're eating in the absence of hunger. We wanted to know if you're stressed. And then the cloud, why did I even put that there? Duh. And machine learning, including deep learning, and that's there for a reason, so hold that thought. All of you know what machine learning is? Yeah, okay. So here's the signal-driven and scheduled EMA, ecological momentary assessment. So it was triggered by sensed mood, sensed eating event, and that's the questions that we asked. And there was also a rule-based schedule, just every 2 hours. And participants can always report back to us. Here's something really important when designing something mobile for mobile health. So user-centered design, going back to the kids that we're working with, they want to be able to tell us stuff. They want agency. They don't want to just be binged. I've learned this again and again. I don't know about adults. Adults are a mystery to me. Shana can talk about adults. But if you allow that, you have to monitor it. So you have an immediate ethical problem when you allow kids, or grown-ups, I guess, although what do I know? When you give them agency to talk to you, you have to listen. I mean, I wish all parents were like that, but it's an ethical responsibility, because what if some kid says, I'm going to commit suicide tomorrow at 3 o'clock and you miss it? That's actually happened. Not to me. So that's a big choice to make. It's going to be more attractive if kids can talk to you because they love to talk about themselves. But it's going to be a huge burden on your students because that's who's going to be watching the back end. Right? Okay. Any questions about that? So we did mood detection via voice traces. These are people coming in and having moods. We did these family discussions. Actually, what we did in the end, killing 2 birds with 1 stone, is we asked them about family eating practices and what they'd like to see that was different. And invariably, they had a fight. Or the kids got really annoyed. It was, Mom, it was great. And then the algorithm development for the eating, which is being done in several labs across the country, but we're trying to converge. There's actually going to be a conference on it in London soon. A word on data. So if you think about it, that's a lot of data, right? And it's continuous. A ton of data. Everybody see the tons of data that we're getting? Okay. A word on data, theory, and models. Our theories are not up to the task of intervening in real time. Now, why is that? This is a great article, by the way. Oh no, this is mine. There's one by Bill Shoot, there should be a different one. This is also good. There's one by Bill Riley, which I thought that was that slide, called something, Theories in the Time of Mobile Technologies. But it's a great article. I'll put the right slide in here. A just-in-time adaptive intervention. Everybody know what that is? Yeah. So let's think about that for a moment. It's delivered via mobile devices, anytime, anywhere, when you're in need or vulnerable. So don't intervene on me when I'm in the car, for instance. Don't intervene on me when I'm fine, unless intervening on me when I'm fine is better than intervening on me when I'm angry. Or, you know, when you know that I'm about to go into some stressful discussion. Maybe that's a good time. We have to learn people's patterns as we go. But our theories are quite static. They don't account for the loopiness of human behavior and the changing contexts that we're in, right? So here's my favorite theory. This is self-determination theory. Relatedness, autonomy, control, and support supposedly to precedes competence and self-regulation, which leads to motivation, which leads to behavior change. It's so beautiful, right? What's wrong with this theory? It's right, it's a one-way ticket from A to B, and that's not how we work. So how do we model this temporally dense, highly contextualized, multi-level data to work in real time, to understand and intervene in real time? I feel like we're not even asking the right questions anymore. I think we're right, we're asking, there's this, over here, a streetlight, you've heard this joke? It's all of our behavioral science and all of the science until now. And we're looking under that streetlight, but there's all this other stuff going on over here that looks more like that, right? So we've got this dynamic multi-scale modeling requirement. It should be conceptually seated, but data-driven. In other words, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Start with the self-determination theory. Start somewhere. Measure it, and then you can throw things out that don't work and add new things that you find. Thank you. So where are the useful signals in the current noise? What are the semantically interesting patterns of personal and social behavior that you're finding? You know, a transdisciplinary research, we need a search for meaningful mechanisms. So we can't do this alone as behaviorists because we can't deal with the data. I have to sit there with somebody who does machine learning or agent-based modeling or a combination of Bayesian techniques and try and sort out, you know, this pattern comes back again and again and again. What is it? It's bazit. It's a new variable. I mean, think of engagement. Here's the good story. So engagement, right? We used to give people questionnaires to ask if they were engaged in the technology or in anything. You know, did you like it? Did it make you happy? Until I imagine an engineer one night, a game developer maybe, he's in the bathtub, he's drinking wine, and suddenly goes, Eureka! All this back-end data that we've been throwing away. That's where engagement lives. I can know how often people stay on the page, how often they open it, how much they go back. But it was data that we were throwing away. I was alive in the game period when we were throwing that data away. Don't tell anyone. So we need to search together for meaningful mechanisms in this data stream. And we need models that personalize adaptively as time-sensitive new data comes in, right? One of the worst disservices that we've done always is intervene on people who don't need it. So I'm intervening on Sheena, who's not named Shana. I've been calling you Shana all my life. Turns out, Sheena. I'm intervening on Sheena because she needs to get more physical activity. And the goal is 1,000 steps or 10,000 steps. And she hits 10,000 steps and I'm still giving her the same intervention. It's not smart, right? We don't need to do that anymore. Okay. The challenge across disciplines, choosing technologies, everybody has to understand why you're choosing that technology, right? It has to be a group goal, and you have to have buy-in from your target people. There is what you really want versus what is out there. What's on the shelf that we can really use, right? So using off-the-shelf technologies can be very attractive. You know, if it's built and usable, why heck not? However, often off-the-shelf technologies are black box, and otherwise we don't know the algorithms that go into, we don't know what they're doing in there. So we don't know if it's a truth. So Actigraph used to be black box. They've finally given us our data. You know, many times I've gone out with the head of it, taken him dancing, wine and dined, it's like, God. And also, we have to be able to monitor it in real time, which is coming down the pike. Or they're not really Bluetooth, or they won't give you your data. Many off-the-shelf technologies will not give you the data, right? So some things to think about. So Fitbit, for instance, you have to pay money to get the data off of it, and then it's not complete unless you work with a company like Fitabase, which knows how to get the data and has a deal with Fitbit. But many, many technologies don't give you the data. And actually, whose data is it, really? Is it the company's data? So whose data are you collecting? So this is a different talk, but I just want to say it's your data. It's you as the user should own that data and should be able to say, use it or don't, right? Sorry. All right. Another thing when you're working across the aisles is the, oh yeah, we can do that attitude versus budgetary time and time realities. And what does that really mean? So often I've worked with engineers, in particular computer scientists, who say, no problem, we can do that. Their idea of that and my idea of that turn out not to be the same, which is something that you started the day with, right? That, for me, means a thing that looks beautiful and I can take out into the field. Whereas that, for them, often means, can my student get a paper off of this? And are we then done? So these things have to be discussed seriously ahead of time. And also, choosing technologies, choosing hardware. Often people, if we're working with engineers now, have done some kind of time in a hardware company or a software company. So for instance, if they have in with Nokia, they're going to say, let's use Nokia phones. They might not be the best choice. So make sure that you're choosing with your head on your shoulders. There is a difference between people who study health disparities and people who experience them. So we have to ground truths from the beginning. This means from the ground up, every step of the way, partnership with the people who are going to be using this stuff. And partnership with each other. The thing about these different disciplines is it's the Tower of Babel, to come back to what you stated. At the beginning, everybody uses different language or has different jargon. Often the same words mean different things. My favorite story around that I probably don't have time for, but we can come back for it. The thing you have to keep doing is, in your weekly meetings, which you need to have, preserve some time for presentations to one another so that you know what the other guy's doing, so that they explain their science to you. One of my very close colleagues was doing an intervention when stress started. They were going to do this intervention. They're using this bizarre stress sensing thing. And only after they started the intervention did they realize that the engineers were using the entire stress arc to detect stress. So they weren't notified that there was stress until after the fact. So because they hadn't explained what they were doing in their programming, they weren't doing what the behaviorists thought they were doing. So you got to stay in touch, you've got to have mutual involvement at every phase, and you've got to keep presenting to one another, learning from one another. Taking turns. Engineers and creatives work is often upfront. Medical and behavioral professionals are then in the advisory mode as things are getting started. This is not always academically rewarding. You will have no data. But you have to stay involved, you have to stay patient, and you have to stay creative, and you have to stay on top of it, because if you don't, you're going to get a thing that you can't use. Yeah, we don't. When you go into the field, medical and behavior teams are up front. Engineers and computer science folks are in maintenance and troubleshooting mode. This is not academically rewarding. You have to prepare them for this, and you have to keep them involved. There are many tricks for this. Get them to report in the weekly meetings on the other things they're doing. But don't lose them. And don't treat them like service animals. Think about this up front. When do you need an academic and when do you need to hand it off to a programmer? So maybe you can hand it off, that you have to budget differently, right? Scenario looks completely different if you engage a company. Understand the trade-offs. Anybody here who owns company? Has worked with company? Okay, I get to say this then. My experience working with companies is that I don't have an intellectual partner. I don't have an intellectual partner, somebody to think along with me. They've got a thing, here's my thing. I really want you to use my thing. My thing is much better than what you want. Here's the thing, it's gorgeous. So even in, there's one company called EMI by John Moon, who he is pretty much an intellectual partner. He also has a PhD. It's a small company. I don't know how he stays alive. He's got a good EMA. He's got a good EMA thing that hooks up with sensors. But for the most part, my experience has been disappointing. You get a slick thing that doesn't do what you need. So if you're going to work with a company, and sometimes that's a good idea, it just hasn't ever been a good idea for me, then you need to upfront to have a good, to know what the partnership's going to give you and what it's not going to give you. These slides are from my friend Santosh Kumar, who we do this duet talk at the mHealth training in Los Angeles every time. And this is how he thinks about getting yourself a behaviorist. You know, the vetting process for getting somebody like me is the problem, is there going to be computer science dissertations coming out of this, right? Very important. Otherwise, get a company. So there's got to be something meaty and scientific in there for the kids, which means everything you do is going to be overprogrammed. But an ideal health collaborator has a desire to learn and treat us as peers, not as service providers. I can't tell you how important this is. The engineers and the computer scientists that you're working with are not your service providers. They are equal intellectual partners, even though at the second half of the project, or the third half if you're moving too slowly in the first two halves, they are in maintenance mode. They are still equal intellectual partners. Remember that. And has capacity and resources to conduct research, user studies with newly developed technologies, which I argue with him this point every time because it makes it harder for junior researchers, right? But this is how he's thinking, and he's the man. This is his other thing. In the engagement process, when engaging moi, understand the needs of the other discipline. Patience is everything. You've got to earn collaborators' faith and trust, back to the Rocky the Flying Squirrel mode. Be generous in publication. So publication is a huge issue because engineers, computer scientists, art, the creatives, and health people all publish in different venues. And unless you've got some mad, angry tiger like myself on your education committee and on your promotions committee saying computer science conferences count as papers, because they are, and they're highly peer-reviewed, and you know, JAMA is not, it counts for a computer scientist. They're going, JAMA, who cares? So different publishing, ways of publishing, different order of, you know, of authors. So senior authorship in computer science doesn't mean the same as senior authorship in medicine, as second authorship in psychology. And who can be on who goes on the papers? You know, this is all stuff that you have to keep track of because these teams get very big. And developing that shared terminology, we've talked a lot about that. I can't tell the story, don't have enough time. I do, story. So when I am a psychologist, I think, but I did my PhD in medical ethics and adolescent health, so it was a combined situation. But I was housed in medical ethics, and I knew from nothing in ethics, but it was a cool job and a nice way to get my PhD. So we had lunch with all these philosophers and me. It was required every day, required department lunch. I mean, it was a tiny department. And the head of my department talked a lot about experimentation. So I was really excited. I thought, wow, we're going to do actual empirical ethics, which I think is very important. And, you know, after about a week of this, I realized that when he said experiment, he meant thought experiment. Different thing altogether. Just like the word it, let's make it. When you're talking to somebody from a different field, it is going to look different in there. There's a really great cartoon that I couldn't find, but maybe I can find it and put it in the slides, of what the swing, have you seen the swing one? And it says, what is this, what the person wants a swing. And it's a very simple swing. And then the designer designs a swing, and it looks entirely different from what the person wanted. And then, oh, whoops. And then it goes on and on and on through all the different phases, and the person just really wanted a simple swing. So it can look really different. So lessons, did I say everything I wanted to say? Oh, this is going all sorts of directions. I did that. There we are. Medical and healthcare, or really VS sort of healthcare professionals, they're really different disciplines. Is health always medical? I argue about this all the time. My daughter is a doctor. She says everyone's a patient. So once they've got a health record, they're a patient. I disagree with that. Are we working with people or patients? I say we're working with people unless they are in the hospital and working with patients, or maybe in the doctor's office, right? And for me, are we pulling bodies out upstream? So I think that one of the things that mobile health really can help us with is avoiding becoming a patient. But when you work with healthcare professionals, medical professionals and healthcare professionals together in the same room, the other people on the team often think we are the same people, but we ain't the same people. And then we suddenly find ourselves at odds with each other because we haven't discussed it because we thought we were the same people. So remember that you're not. Okay, lessons from digital natives. Are you willing to share your data with digital traces with researchers like me? Heck yes. But are you willing to share it, for instance, with your friends or family? Heck no. Right? Which is like, I can't begin to tell you how many people have sat down and said, okay, we're going to do this family dashboard. And I'm saying, no, we are not going to do this family dashboard. However, this is from focus group interviews last year. Things change really fast. You have to, you don't know anything with kids, and I think with adults in the changing landscape of new technologies. You have to keep updating. You have to keep an open mind. You have to keep asking the same questions again and again because stuff changes so quickly. Privacy and security concerns for kids, digital natives, are just entirely different than us. These, I'm going to say something racist. I won't say it, but these incredibly elderly, like myself, white people making decisions for all of these young people of color, it's just not a good policy. Bring them in and ask them. You know, and people say, they don't understand the implications. And I would say, you know, we don't understand the implications. They have real needs that they're willing to make a lot of trade-offs with their data. Maybe they don't have to. Maybe it's better sometimes to share your data. But so privacy, security, and ethical issues, you have to revisit them all the time. Okay, lessons from digital natives. They really like to talk to us. This too can change, but it hasn't changed currently. They're honest all the time. So we thought, yes, let's open up the platform, let them talk to us. They like it. About 14 messages a day per kid, and 3 kids in a family. So it's keeping my students really busy. And most of it's not so important, but they like to talk to us. And then you sometimes have to talk back to them. So, and one of my other interventions for physical activity, one of the exit interviews, the kid said, it's like having a doctor in your pocket. And these were kids that were texting us 20 times a day. Kids are born digital. It's an expected part of their experience. They also expect it to go well. So if you are doing what we were doing in that very first project, the Know Me Networks, is we were sensing sedentary time. And we had to be right. You can't say to somebody, I see that you've been sitting for half an hour if you haven't been. I don't know how many of you have an Apple Watch that's like wrong half the time. You can't do that with kids. I hate this thing. But I lost my Fitbit. You can't do that with kids. You've got to be right. And it has to look good and it has to work. That's what they're used to. They're used to slick technology. And they're used to technology being part of the experience. So when you're trying to decide whether or not to use technology, if it can help the problem, I would say do it. This last thing I wanted to tell you about is Northwestern's transdisciplinary training. This is a full website of fantastic modules. The website's on the bottom there, and these slides will be available. And it's free. This was all developed by Bonnie Spring and her colleagues. And it has different modules depending on who you are. But I find watching the modules of the other people kind of even more fun than watching my own. And it's very interactive, and it's really, really worth it. Oh, there it is. It's www.teamscience.net. When you're working in transdisciplinary science, there is no such thing as a stupid question. Dare to be stupid. Ask if you don't know. And please stay connected. Thank you. So I purposely left time for questions, so you better have some. Because it's really awful to stand up here and everybody, no, I don't have a question. If you don't have a question, you can also tell a story. Sheena, not Sheena.
Thanks, Donna. That was great. So I have a question about different motivations about different team members.
Yes.
So, you know, we're doing work with, and we have computer science folks on our team, for example. They're light years ahead of us in terms of what they want to design. They want to design for, 2030 and beyond. And we're trying to test what we consider an innovation, and they don't think it's an innovation at all. That's been around, it's old hat.
Yeah.
So their motivations are really for a reward or a discovery for something in the future.
That's right.
Ours are for testing something that exists to promote health or disease prevention or self-management. So what would you say about how we can reconcile those two tensions? Are there ways to motivate everybody on the team differently?
3 things. 1, so everybody, you all heard the question, right? I think it sounds like there wasn't enough discussion up front about what was going to happen. So up front, always discussing, what it is that you're going to need. Another thing is what I've found is that, and I'm really lucky to be housed in a department, and you guys maybe have this too, where there are also programmers available who don't want to do glorious academic stuff and don't need a degree and don't need a paper and don't care. They like to program. There's plenty of people like that. They're very expensive. But that might be who you need for something like this, right? And then I like the hybrid model of, we want this new thing, and then engineers and computer scientists, especially when they're working with kids, are going to they have to reinvent the wheel again and again. I keep coming to them saying, look, Santosh Kumar, Tomaz, Nabil, they've already done a lot of this sensing. Can we use their algorithms? No, because then the student can't get paper. So knowing that, sometimes it's a hybrid that you say, okay, we might need some new things, or even I don't mind the over-programming because I get the intellectual partnership, which to me is really valuable. And then you say, and then you take it to here, and then we go with a computer programmer after that. That's one way. Is that good enough for now? Yeah. I saw up there, yeah. And there are a couple up there. 3.
Is it on already?
4, yay. Go for it, you guys.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the talk. When I'm thinking about a team-based approach, and I know later in the day people will be talking about funding, and this was kind of a nice talk about different players in mHealth and not all of them academic, but this summer there is an R21 for mobile health in low and middle income countries, and I'm applying for that R21.
Fogarty.
Yes, and when I think about a team-based approach, I'm thinking about my budget and the fact that most of the money I want to actually go to the study and to low and middle income countries' sites. So you did have one slide with kind of the different players that you think are essential in a mobile health
I had
project.
two, but yes.
But if you, I'm just wondering if there's sort of like, if there's a way to pare it down to like the absolutely essential checky boxes
No.
and ways not to spend your entire grant money on high income
There's
providers.
not really a way to do that and not lose out a little bit. And I've been arguing with the Fogarty people for years that this should be an RO one, but whatever. But there are ways around it with the Fogarty, and that is by finding your programming computer science experts in the developing country. It's much harder to do that work like that. And you are gonna have to pare it down. And these were big projects, both of them. So it depends on what you're gonna do. I mean, I threw the kitchen sink at you guys today, but I had actually all of my projects had too many people on them. So.
As you're thinking about writing your grant, what would you say are the large buckets that like have to have an expert?
Depends on what you're doing. What are you doing?
It's a time sensitive. I wrote down this G-tie thing. I need to look up and learn about it, but it's sort of a time sensitive mHealth intervention around labor and delivery to try to get people to a skilled provider if they're not delivering to a skilled provider.
Is it going to be mostly SMS based?
Yes.
Okay. So it's probably going to be flip phones, right? So you don't need so many creatives because really, you probably don't need a script writer because really, so yeah, there's ways to pare it down depending on what you need. Don't cheat on the expertise. You do need, I'm not even sure you need an engineer, depending on what you want to do. You might just need a programmer and a good programmer because what you have to, choosing a platform for a text messaging intervention in a developing country is really tricky. WhatsApp used to be great, but they've made some changes now and I haven't been in a developing country. It's not great anymore. You can't get the back end anymore. So, yeah.
You may want to look at Access Mobile locally too. They're doing SMS texting and other areas to build.
But getting the right text out at the right time and getting your back end data and using these, you need a programmer. And that might not even be somebody who's a computer science person. Is that helpful?
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. Hi.
Hi, thank you, first of all. I've been working with some computer programmers and specialists in machine learning, natural language processing. I'm a neurologist by training. And one of the major cultural divides that I've encountered is just the time frame in which people expect to publish. So what I have found is that the computer scientists with whom I'm working frequently want to publish something in what I would view as being just very, very fast. A couple months maybe from beginning
and they send it to you the night
end.
before. And would you comment on it now, please?
I'm sorry?
And they send it to you the night before and ask for comment?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And by the way, we're going to submit it tomorrow. And that's within the field of academics, that's unheard of. Like I'm used to kind of thinking of, oh, okay, well, we'll take a couple years.
Within the field of our academics.
Right, within our academics, within mine.
Yeah.
This actually breeds some frustration on their end where they're like, come on, but in a couple of years, we will have, our competitors will have already built a company and so on.
Yeah.
And from our end, and particularly I'm junior faculty and trying to convince somebody else on the grant that, no, we really got to move quickly. They go, whoa, we don't really understand this. Let's slow it down. What's your rush? We'll get this out in a few years. How do you balance that?
Okay, so you're not going to change that. But it sounds to me like you're trying to make their papers more like the papers that you would write. Don't do that. Let them put out so make sure that your name is in the right place. If you're junior, are you PI?
So it depends on the particular publication. Sometimes I'm not usually PI for the project that I have in mind, which is one of the frustrating things. It makes I have to pass the buck to somebody else who has the ultimate decision making.
Okay, so if you can get senior author, because they often don't care about that last place, that's really useful. You have to convince your promotions committee that these conferences are good. And the way to do that is to get their percentage accepted, which is lower than the percentage accepted in many of our journals. So make sure they're going to good conferences. They are going to have to publish fast. That's what they need to do.
Right.
But they don't need to publish the kind of things that you want to put in. You have to wait. And they're going to get like 12 papers out of this, and you're going to get 1 or 2.
Sure.
Right? But here's the fun part. When you actually finally have data, they've developed stuff and you finally have data, you get to go back over all the papers that they published and steal judiciously, not plagiarize, but they decide which pieces go in, and just don't try and make their papers your papers.
Right. It'll be easier if I was PI.
No, it would not change one iota.
In that I can see and understand that, but trying to convince somebody else who needs to PI that, no, we just need to publish these papers on it real quickly, you'll be on them. Usually they've just said, no, I'm not going to publish that fast, and that kills your collaboration.
That does kill your collaboration.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, send that person to me and let me talk to them.
Okay, thank you.
I mean it. Hook us up and let's talk about speed of publication in mobile health and why it's important. I'm happy to do it. Any other questions? Stories? Yes, yes. This is fun.
So I have a question thinking about disseminating mobile health interventions broadly.
Yeah, I noticed that I left that whole part out. Yeah.
Yeah. And the idea that there's not always a one-size-fits-all approach for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
which is what you're sort of alluding to.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just wondering if you had any kind of thoughts, tips, tricks, advice, things like that about how, and maybe the answer is that it just doesn't work, but how to take something that's developed and then be able to use it, say, within Denver in a certain group of people, and then like all with the same problem, but just different people,
Mm-hmm.
And then being able to do that in a rural area and be able to do it in these different areas and still have it be meaningful.
You have to have a little bit of redevelopment every time.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to have to iterate. I mean, you can get the core thing together. So Sheena's going to talk about research design later, and she'll probably talk about most. And and a dissemination piece where you can figure out what works for whom.
Mm-hmm.
And so you might have like a click it, the click it toys that used to be able to, or Lego.
Mm-hmm.
And some pieces work for certain populations, and you click that in. But mobile health, you can't design a thing and be done.
Right.
There will be iteration. So we do need these new models that grow so that we can understand personal behavior and react to that. And that is still future music. We're working on it.
Mm-hmm.
But the actual intervention, is it going to work for everybody? Probably never.
Mm-hmm.
They don't. But there are big pieces of it that might.
Mm-hmm.
And things around that you can put on or take off. So a core intervention that you can develop using Sheena's fantastic methodologies, and then the things that you have to redevelop to fit your particular population. Does that make sense?
Yeah, kind of like a choose your own adventure.
That. Except that you choose the adventure often.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I know that's not very satisfying, but there's no... Time for one more question.
Thanks. So this is less about health, I guess, but it's still behavior related. So one word, Jewel, the vapor high school students that are
vaping.
obsessed.
Yeah.
I think they use a lot of the behaviors like the teenagers like, and they're hugely successful. How can we learn from that?
How can we learn
and make
from...
something else health related that will actually promote and alter their behavior, like drool?
So that's an entirely different talk. It's easier to give somebody something that they want than it is to take something away. And these might not be the same behavioral principles, but we can learn from some of what industry does. In fact, that's where we got focus groups, from industry. That's where we got agile design. I think that's true, right? From industry. So a lot of our methods come from them. The actual behavioral principles, cognitive dissonance, they use that, we can use that, but it's just it's like so much harder to get people to stop doing a thing than it is to get them to start doing a thing, especially if it's an attractive thing. Social networking works really, really well. Like what we did at my university for vaping, or for smoking, is we made this huge mistake and said that people were only allowed to smoke outside. No more smoking in the buildings. This was back in the time when people still smoked in buildings. And of course, it looked like everybody was smoking then. So many more people started to smoke. Yes, that was a bad idea. So how can you harness that? So the best thing to do is in that case, hire a bunch of gorgeous human beings to walk around and not smoke and go, ew, smoking. Maybe that's what you need to do. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we have about 15 minutes. We have exactly 15 minutes. We've been perfectly timed this morning. Let's stick with that. So we have about 15 minutes to transition. I believe there's still coffee and maybe some more breakfast outside it's time for brunch. And so what's that? Mimosas, virgin. And so if you are going to do Sheena's breakout session, have everyone come back here. Oh, okay. Maybe out in the hallway. All right. So those of you who are going to attend Sheena's talk, that will be in here starting at 10:15. And if you're going to Blaine's breakout session on user-centered design, so if you are wanting to know more about what is this human-computer interaction, there will be robots. Just kidding. Sorry. And so that room is kind of hidden and hard to get to. So at 10 after, please gather out near the registration area and we'll walk you over to the room where Blaine's talk will be. So everyone understand what we're doing? All right, good.